No matter how you feel about the Five Nights at Freddy's games, you cannot deny the impact the series had on horror games and, well, games in general. Being that as of 2015, FNaF 3 was the third most popular video game to be played on YouTube, only being beat by FIFA 16 and Black Ops 3. And not to mention the tons of fan games that came off them, which basically boosted their popularity even more. The impact of these games was huge, spawning 5 different games, spin-offs, 2 books, and an upcoming movie. So let's take a look back at the Five Nights at Freddy's series. Scott Cawthon, a struggling Christian game developer at the time, decided to release a game called Chipper & Sons Lumber Company. When it came out, the game got negative criticism, saying that the mascot of the game looked like a scary animatronic, which made Scott almost stop making games entirely. It wasn't until later he decides to go with it and use the creepiness to his advantage to get back at the negative criticism. From that, we got what we know today as Five Nights at Freddy's. The first game helped lay down the foundation for the rest of the series, the basic gameplay of which was limited by the capability of the software used to make the game, led to a very unique and interesting game with certain mechanics that have rarely been seen before. There were games like Night Trap on Sega CD that were similar in gameplay, but the style and mechanics were extremely different in execution. But let's get a little bit off track here and change the subject to the classic Super Mario Bros., a game built specifically to be as simple as possible with extra limitations. The game was not really a game, but an experiment to see if a game could be extremely bare bones but still have fun and addicting gameplay without the need of adding any special chips or components. If you look at the original pixel art for Mario, you can see how the power of the NES and cartridge limited his design. Limited by the color palette for the time, Nintendo decided to use red, brown, and yellow. His mustache was to show features of his nose and mouth, and without it, it would just feel off. His overalls have a point to them too, which was added to help the rest of his body contrast well. And Scott Cawthon did almost the same thing with the FNaF games through the limitation of his game-making software. The game's shortcomings became its eventual appeal, the same reason why some people might want to play the original Super Mario Bros. Over Super Mario Bros. 3. When Scott made FNaF, he had to know 3 things. There must be creative limitations, it has to be scary, and it must be unique. The engine FNaF runs on does not natively support free roam, so he had to think outside of the box to simulate a horror game in a way that has never been done before, and by making it as if you can't ever move, adds to the strategy and helplessness you feel in the game. Rather than the shoot them till they die mentality Dead Rising or Resident Evil games have, FNaF made it so that if you die, it's your fault. You didn't have to find an extra heart piece, you didn't lose a power-up or a weapon, you just weren't trying hard enough, making you more and more immersed the longer you play. When you play the game, you don't want to die. You strategize in your head on how you can survive till 6 AM, you're conserving your energy well by closing the doors when necessary, you get all the way to 5 AM, your heart is pounding more and more, you're almost there, and right when you're about to make it, the second FNaF game takes the gameplay from the first game and expands on it a lot by removing a few of the key features and mechanics the first game had, but replacing them with new or better ones. With the first game, we had phone calls and a few little Easter eggs hidden around the game, hinting at the story being more than it seems, trying to hint at some kind of lore. But I credit FNaF 2 as what made it the spotlight of the games. The people who were interested in the story before were just wondering about Golden Freddy and a few other Easter eggs left in the first game. But it wasn't until the second game that we had a bigger interest in it because of strange inconsistencies between the continuity of the first and second games, which helped establish the second game as a prequel, which in turn only made fans want to dive deeper into the depths of lore the games offer. With the gameplay, Scott Cawthon added mini-games between the nights in an Atari 2600-esque feel to help drive the story even more, kind of like playable cutscenes. The mini-games would later be used in all the following games as a main staple to further drive the plot. There was also a lack of doors, which were one of the biggest mechanics of the first game. Plus, adding 6 more characters and a lot more mechanics to juggle between than the first game made this arguably the hardest one in the series. With FNaF 2, it brought way more of an audience to the games, arguably making the series peak in success. With the third game, a more easier, laid-back approach was added to the game, reducing the game difficulty by a tremendous amount when compared to the other games. With FNaF 3, Scott lowered the animatronic count to 1 and changed the mechanics from frantically juggling to more of a memorization game. It was alright, to say the least. You have to distract the new animatronic Springtrap as you survive till 6 AM like in the rest of the games. You do so by playing sounds in certain rooms and trapping Springtrap in vents, the catch being that you have to keep track of ventilation, visual, and audio issues. While the game did pretty well, it was severely lacking in difficulty, which was one of the biggest turnoffs for the players. But people who wanted to get into the FNaF games or just like the easier approach better had a great time with it. While together it's not the best FNaF game, it's certainly the more unique. With the fourth game, a considerable amount of work went into it. Being that this game was subtitled The Final Chapter, fans were expecting a lot from this one. The setting took place in a small child's room rather than the other settings like the pizzeria or Fazbear's Fright like the previous games were. The most notable thing about this game is, unlike the previous games, this one lacks any type of camera system, instead keeping it to a semi-free roam type of gameplay as you try to protect yourself through similar mechanics as the first game, making this sort of a hybrid anniversary remake of the original. What sucks about this is that you have to listen closely to the game, as hearing the animatronics breathe when you crack the door open is the only way to protect yourself. And to hear the audio, you have to crank the volume almost all the way up to maybe hear them slightly breathe, and even then it's a 50-50 chance that you'll still get jump scared. This was the biggest flaw of FNaF 4, being that its biggest mechanic in the game was the most flawed one. It's kinda sad because FNaF 4 had a lot going for it, but if you didn't have to blare the sound in your ears, it would be a lot less hated. There was an update on Halloween adding new modes and animatronics, but the gameplay was pretty much the same, being for more hardcore fans wanting to 100% the game, rather than the casual audience that came from the third one. But besides that, it's kinda sad this game wasn't better. Out of all 4 games, this was probably the most disappointing. But besides that, it was overall a pretty good ending to the series, wrapping everything up pretty well, and honestly, I couldn't think of a better way to send it off. Before I talk about Sister Location, let's go back to around December of 2014. The first of many Five Nights at Freddy's games that was released was called Five Nights at Treasure Island, a Disney-themed FNaF clone based off the popular creepypasta Abandoned by Disney. This is often credited as the first of all of them, but the most popular one has to go to Five Nights at Wario's, being played by tons of huge YouTubers like ScottGames, Markiplier, PewDiePie, and a lot more. Though Five Nights at Treasure Island could be considered the first FNaF clone, Five Nights at Wario's could be the first completed FNaF clone, being that Five Nights at Treasure Island was just a demo at first. But once Five Nights at Wario's was released, we saw an incredible amount of increase in the FNaF fan games. Games like Five Nights at Candy's, Five Nights at Fuckboys, The Joy of Creation, Those Nights at Rachel's, Pogo's, One Night at Blumpty's, Bonnie Simulator, The Return to Freddy's, Five Nights at the Krusty Krab, Five Nights at Freddy's 4 Custom Night, Five Nights at Sonic's, Five Nights at Pingus, Five Nights at Kobarani's 456's, Five Nights at Sanix, Five Nights at Chuck E. Cheese's, Five Nights at Thomas, 5 Golden Nights at Freddy's, Five Nights at Weed, and way more. There was even Star Fox Guard, which was basically Nintendo's answer to FNaF. If these people never made these games, there would be so many obscure talented indie developers still with nobody playing their games. A lot of people who got into the spotlight because of the series now have an even larger audience who would never have played or even seen the original stuff if it wasn't for their contributions to the FNaF games. Talented developers like Jonochrome, WWW Dakota Wood, Nixon, Sable Lin, and Joshua Shaw, Ace Mako, and more, who now have an extra step in relevance, which they use to promote their original games like Ace Mako's Project Opia, Jonochrome's Patina's Paintbrush, or even Project Wario Land by WWW Wario, would never have found as big of an audience as they have now if it wasn't for FNaF, which is something absolutely special. After the release of FNaF 4, we expected an end to the FNaF games, being that FNaF 4 was subtitled The Final Chapter. Sure, Cawthon said he enjoyed the characters and wanted to see them in other things, which was fine. Fans of the games got to see new ideas with the characters they loved, and Scott could press his other creative directions. We got FNaF World from that, and despite the negative reception at launch from the overall lack of quality and bugs, which were later ironed out and fixed, it was actually a pretty fun game, which is something you can't really say about for all the FNaF games. So it was all the more surprising when Sister Location was announced. It made a few parts of the fan community angry, and when it finally came out, there wasn't really an audience for it. Even though it was one of the better games, if not the best one, people just moved on to the next big game like Undertale, and nobody really cared about a new FNaF game. And with the announcement of a major studio release of a FNaF feature film in production, we should expect FNaF to travel with us into the next decade. So for just a guy messing around in a game making software, there's no denying the impact it's had. Hello everyone, if you liked the video, be sure to leave a like and share it anywhere you feel is appropriate. The support is always appreciated. If you want to see more content like this in the future, please be sure to subscribe on YouTube or follow on VidMe and click that bell to get a notification every single time there's a new video. And if you like the sound of my voice, you should check out my channel on YouTube. It's called BizzareBub, and I basically do top 5 videos on topics I find interesting. That said, I hope you enjoyed the video and hopefully you got to learn something new about the FNaF series. And, of course, thanks for watching.